Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Escape the Cubicle and Travel the World webinar. I'm so excited to have you join us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Carol Griffin, and I head the operations team here at Skillcrush. I'm also currently traveling the world Remote Year. Remote Year is curates 4 and 12-month travel programs for remote professionals. So I'm currently in Prague traveling with other remotes while working for Skillcrush. If you're new to Skillcrush, we are a digital tech education company whose mission is to empower women of all ages, ethnicities, and levels of education to enter high-earning and flexible careers in tech. You don't need any prior experience in tech to do it. I'm here today with an expert in building a remote work life that will allow you to travel the world and add adventure to your everyday life while still earning and saving money. I'm personally very passionate about incorporating travel into my daily life, and I'm excited to help answer some of your questions about unlocking this lifestyle for yourself. So before we dive into our discussion, I want to take care of some quick housekeeping. If you miss any of this live webinar, don't worry. We'll be sending you a link to the replay that you can watch as many times as you'd like. I also have a special announcement. We're sending everyone who signed up for our event today a special gift, which I'll announce right before we sign off. To get started, I want to take a moment to do some myth busting about remote work. One of the most common reactions I get from people when I tell them about my work life is that while it sounds exciting, it probably isn't an option for most people. My remote career was something I fell into, not something I planned for. I'm the first person in my family to have ever really traveled. And after spending the first 6 months of my first remote job working from my tiny little studio in Chicago, it finally hit me that I didn't have to be in my tiny little studio in Chicago. I could be working from anywhere. And today I've been to 17 countries and I'm still racking them up. Remote life and remote work is life-changing because it provides us with the option to lead fuller, more balanced lives that we may not have ever even been aware were a possibility before. Remote work also allows people to keep their careers no matter what their circumstances, and it trusts people to make the call for themselves about how and when they need to work. Remote work is also a commonly overlooked way to allow more diverse people into an industry. It allows people to more fully participate in the workforce, no matter what kind of flexibility each of us need as individuals. There are more fully remote companies than ever before, and numerous job boards specializing in exactly this type of position. Especially with the rising demand for tech jobs and careers in the digital space, a remote career is now more attainable than ever. So that being said, today's conversation is all about how you can build a career as a remote worker so that you can travel, explore, or just have a more flexible life. It's all about building what works best for you. Here's everything we'll be covering in today's webinar. Why working remotely can help you live your best, most flexible life. How to actually travel the world as a remote worker while making and even saving money. Exactly what steps you can take to start gaining remote work skills. And the top remote positions hiring now, and which ones to avoid. So my guess is that if you're attending this webinar, you have specific questions about building a career as a traveling remote worker. So I would love to know, what brought you to this webinar? Please introduce yourself in the comments below this video and tell us what kind of remote career you'd like to lead. I want to hear what interests you about remote work, what kind of concerns you have about combining work and travel, what kind of roadblocks to career change you're experiencing, and all of your other questions. Ask away. I want to hear it all. And also, if you have any questions about the webinar, about anything, please drop them in the comment area, and I promise we'll get to them at the end. So, enough about all the housekeeping. Joining me today is an amazing, talented professional nomad who is an expert at escaping the cubicle. Emily Moyer is the head of brand and content at Remote Year and an avid traveler who loves building and working on remote teams. Emily, will you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks, Caro, for introducing me and having me on this webinar today. I'm so excited to get to talk about one of my favorite things in the world to talk about. Hey, everyone out there. I am Emily. As Caro mentioned, I'm the head of brand and content for Remote Year, the program that Caro is traveling with. A little bit on Remote Year. So as she mentioned, we curate international 4 and 12 months work and travel programs for remote professionals. So we take groups of people with all different types of jobs, developers, designers, salespeople, really anything you can think of. We even have a teletherapist on trips around the world. So our travelers go to a new country every month and get to use our platform to be able to, travel the world, explore adventure, while also kicking ass at their jobs. I have been working for Remote Year for about 3.5 years. So I actually have been working remotely and traveling for that long. And it's been an incredible experience at this point. I couldn't imagine not working remotely and not being able to do great work from anywhere. So it's a little bit about Remote Year. I am actually also from Chicago. So we've got another Chicagoan in the house. And a little bit about me outside of work. I am a really big scuba diver. I'm actually in La Paz, Mexico, and I'm going to get to go scuba diving, hopefully with sea lions and manta rays this weekend. Very excited. And if I'm not scuba diving, you'll find me doing something in nature, researching some wellness trend. I'm really into yoga and meditation right now, or just spending time with people that I love. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm excited for to kick this off.
Yes. I mean, the more I get to know about you, the more I'm like, we've been leading like parallel lives this whole time, and we have so much to talk about. So one of these days, our travels are going to have to intersect so we can like, scuba dive in person. You'll have to.
Are you a diver too, Caro?
No. So you'll have to like get me over that hump, because I'm like intrigued, but I'm also like, I don't know about that. So we'll add it to our list. But starting with the basics here, I would love to hear a little bit more about how you found out about remote work and what kind of drew you to remote work.
Yeah. So my whole world with remote work has always centered around travel. So to give a little bit of background, I was fortunate enough to start traveling at age 15. So I did my first vacational international travel program then, and was immediately hooked. So every summer after that, I somehow convinced my parents to let me go to foreign countries by myself. And at age 19, I moved to Argentina for a year. So I was just madly in love with travel and realized that it was where I learned the most, and it was where I was sort of at my best. So then when I graduated, of course you'd think, well, great, like she moved abroad and like it all was like, hunky-dory. But of course, that's not how life works. And I started working for a really great mission-driven organization called Teach for America. I taught for a couple of years, and then I worked on the fundraising side. I had that nagging feeling of feeling like I needed more freedom in my life. And I really needed to be able to build travel in my life in a really meaningful way. So, of course, I went to Teach for America and said, hey, guys, like, can I go do my fundraising job from Thailand? Had been very inspired by Tim Ferriss's The 4-Hour Work Week.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you feel about him, Caro, but I at least can for being the godfather of like planting that seed in my mind.
Totally, yeah.
And ended up actually getting rejected. Got a hard no. Could not take my fundraising job to Thailand.
Oh, man.
I was a little disappointed, I'm sure, as you can imagine, but didn't give up. And at that point, decided I was going to figure out a way to work remotely and travel. And so, yeah, that was sort of the introduction to my idea of wanting to work remotely. And then after 6 months on the road and trying to be a travel blogger, which was not for me, Remote Year was born. And that was sort of my first real big remote job.
Don't we all go through that travel blogger phase? I feel like I definitely did too.
Honestly, I feel like it's like in a certain era, like if you were like in a few years of, out of college, it was like, yeah, just like throw some photos up on Instagram and you could be a travel blogger.
I will say that having, like I'm in my second month in Remote Year now, and it's amazing to me. I expected more people to already have remote jobs when they started. And it's really interesting to me, people who have like these really in-demand skill sets and who have really proven their worth at their job and really being able to like convince their boss, like, no, you need me and you're going to let me do this because this is how you keep me. And there are so many people with that story in my program that really just kind of drove home for me too, of like, no, if you get those skills, like you can write your own ticket and you can make your remote like career a reality and like design your own remote job.
It's so true. Like my story is a little bit different in that like I found a remote role because I was looking for a remote role, but especially on Remote Year, there's so many people whose jobs may not have been remote before, but who take a look at what they're doing and say, yep, almost everything I do is done on a computer or done on the phone. And they have that conversation with their boss to say, hey, like I'm a high performer and I'm killing it. And this is sort of the next step that I'd like to take in my own professional development. And they get permission. And that's a lot of what we actually do at Remote Year, which I'm sure you know is help people go through that and actually help people with those conversations.
Yeah. So you mentioned that, you came about it a different way. You just like found a remote job, and that is how I came about it too. When I actually heard about my original role at Skillcrush, I had been following Skillcrush for a while and was really attracted to this like mission-based organization that was teaching women to code. And as a female developer, I was really drawn to that. But also, I remember replying and being like, "Oh, it's remote. I wish they had like a real office," because I had been a freelancer and was like, I worked at an agency briefly and like taught, but I had never had like a traditional 9 to 5 for like an extended period of time. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess like they're really cool though, so I guess I'll do that. And it was definitely an adjustment for me. And then like to figure out how to work remotely and do it well. And then I hit that point like I talked about like 6 months in where I was like, wait a minute, why am I sitting in this 400 square foot studio like in my bed? Like I could be, like I one day dreamed of going to London, and like that was like the big dream. And now I'm like, here I am. It's like you talked about like you started at 15 and then the itch had been scratched. And like I feel like once you rip the Band-Aid off, it's like there's no going back.
Yeah. So now, Carol, like, do you wish Skillcrush had an office?
Oh, hard no.
Agreed.
As much as I love my coworkers and would love to see them more, I'm but 2 of them came to visit me this week in Prague, and like one of them had never been outside of the U.S., and so now she's like plotting her next trip, and I'm like, yeah, see, we got you, welcome
Contagious.
to the dark side.
That's totally contagious.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I guess it sounds like you were pretty set on like wanting to travel, and that was like such a big motivation of it. Like, were you ever intimidated by the idea of trying to juggle travel and work at the same time, or were you like, no, I got it?
Yeah, such a good question. So I think someone once told me there's only 2 feelings in life: love and fear, right? So everything all comes back.
I like that.
I do too. It was really mind-blowing when I heard it. But this idea of being intimidated by working and traveling, that wasn't actually the piece that was scary to me. What was scary to me was making a really big life change. So at the time, I had like a pretty traditional job. I was working in fundraising, as I mentioned, at Teach for America in Chicago in an office. And this concept of saying like, I am going to figure out one way or another how to work remotely and travel. And it may be with Teach for America. It may not be. I actually don't have the answer there, but I know that that's like the path that I want to be on. That's the lifestyle I want to live. It was really scary to actually take the first step to even have that conversation with my boss. It was really scary when he said no and I had to figure out plan B. It was really scary when I had conversations with my friends and family and they were like, what are you even talking about working remotely from Thailand? Like, especially 6 years ago, like that was just not a conversation. Now it's a lot more mainstream. Remote year exists. There's a lot of other companies that are offering way more flexible work options. There's way more remote jobs. It's just way more common. But even so, like it's against really the status quo, right? It's an alternative path. It's a different way to sort of live. And so being the person who was going to step outside my comfort zone and really like push forward and be a pioneer there was terrifying. And so I felt like I actually could be successful once I was there, but it was like, how am I going to get from A to B? That was like the scary part. And I think what really helped me was asking people who actually had done it before, how did they do it? And what did they feel when they were going through the process? And like, you won't be surprised, but they were scared too, right? Like it's a scary thing to like make that big jump, especially when it's such a drastic change from what your current life was. At the time, I had an apartment, I had a boyfriend, I had sort of like all the things that I had to basically be like, I'm going to say goodbye to all of this so that I can like go do this other thing. And granted, that doesn't necessarily, sorry, my computer's overheating, but it doesn't have to be the same story for everyone. Everyone's story is different, but that's sort of where it was there. So yeah, that was the intimidating piece. But I think just listening to my gut and knowing what I needed to do for my life and not ignoring that just because it was a scary thing, I think was the best thing I ever did.
That's awesome. It's interesting because it's like it's changed so much in the last 6 years or 5 years or 3 years or even 2 years. Like it's become so much more acceptable. And maybe acceptable is not the right word. Like less like, what the hell are you doing?
More mainstream, yeah.
Yeah. Now I get a lot of like my family was so supportive of like, that's so awesome. Go do it. And I was really worried when I told my mom, I was like, I don't think I'm going to be home for Christmas for like the first time ever. And she was like, oh honey, go do it. I'm so proud of you. Yeah, I'm so jealous.
Amazing.
Go do it. But for me, the fear was definitely more around like, because I wasn't making such a huge life change. It was like, I did go a little too big. Maybe my first time I was like, not only like had I never left the country and never traveled by myself, I was like, I'm going to do a month in Europe by myself in 4 different cities.
Go big or go home. That's what they say, right?
Totally. That's what I did. And I ran into so many trouble. I like at one point called Ada on the phone. I will remember this forever. And she's probably like, stop telling the story. But I remember standing on a street corner in London and like crying and calling her. And then it started raining on me. I was like, this is like a romantic comedy, except without the meet cute. Because I was like by myself and I just, had no idea what I was doing. And I think that was really my biggest fear. But I definitely like eased into it. I've spent the last couple years like, traveling or having kind of a home base or doing kind of the part-time travel thing. And so by the time I got here, my friends were like, wait, you still have an apartment? We didn't even realize you were still here. Like, or like that you were traveling time. So it was a lot more acceptable. So it's like, you can ease into it, but yeah.
Well, I also think exactly what you just said is like, that's actually like, it's just because you make this change doesn't mean like you have to be on the road forever either, right? Like the concept of working remotely and traveling actually just means you have the freedom to be where you want to be. And sometimes that means going home. And sometimes that means like you want to be able to be there for the 2 weeks before your best friend's about to have a baby, the 2 weeks after. Great. You get to go do that. So I think it's really seeing it as more like actually like, sure, maybe I really want to work remotely and travel right now, but like the long play is actually it just allows me to like live my life in a way that allows me to show up for different things in the ways that I want to show up for them. And I think especially now that I've been on the road for a few years, that's what's been incredible to sort of see how it's morphed for me into something that's, even better than I could have imagined.
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm so passionate about remote work, even outside of my own personal desire to travel a lot and to live my life this way, is that it just, especially like even just on the Skillcrush team, I've seen how many different types of people we've been able to like welcome onto our team and support in their like living their life the way they want. Like we have team members with chronic illnesses who need different things than the people whose husband, has to move out of state for their job every year and now gets to keep their career with them, or who have children at home or like whatever the case may be. And that's the part for me that's always so exciting to be like, I love being in a meeting and seeing like, the mom who's like, I'm turning off my camera because I need to breastfeed, but I'm still here, or like I need to pump or like whatever. And yeah, like, oh yeah, I'm moving. We had someone moving from like Portland to Seattle, and it's like that's great. You still got to come. You're still part of the team, and you get to do whatever you want, even if it's be there for your best friend's first child's birth.
Yeah, just in case you're wondering, I am coming home for that, so that's part of that.
It's like even being on remote year, I've seen like that's that's just as big a part of like everyone's like travel as I want to go do that thing this weekend is the like the best friend's wedding or the childbirth or the like the big life events that you want to be there for, which is really cool.
Totally, they just sort of get added to the amazing things you get to do on the weekends.
So how do you find balance between work and all these exciting things that you can do as a remote worker, whether that's go home for the baby shower or, go on that fun side trip?
Yes. I think the most important thing to remember as a remote worker, especially one who's traveling, is that your work enables you to live this lifestyle. And so really just remembering that, where your prioritization lies is ensuring that you're still able to do a really great job at your work. And so I think for me, and that looks different for everyone. What you need what you need versus what I need is obviously going to be different. What's worked for me is actually having a pretty regular schedule during the week, Monday through Friday. Like my schedule is like, I get up and I work. I think the big thing that changes is depending on what time zone I'm in.
Same. That's always me too, yeah.
Exactly. So, you can adjust your schedule based on, what time zone you're in. Caro's in Europe right now. So we were talking about how it's amazing to be able to have, if most of your team is on America's time, you actually get a few more hours in the morning to go do something fun or to actually get a bunch of like deep work time done when, there actually isn't anyone else online. So no one can ping you or Slack you or whatever. And so I think that's like been one of the coolest things, actually being able to adjust my schedule based on where I am. But yeah, I'd say the big part of balancing for me is actually having a pretty regular schedule and also doing some planning, like not knowing that like this weekend I'm going scuba diving. It's all planned out. Like I know what I'm going to be able to go do. And I'm not like thinking about, oh, I'm missing out on something during the week. Cause no, I've actually like got that planned. I'm going to go get some fish tacos later. And like, that's it. And I'm sure, Caro, you know this from being in remote year, but I think you also just have to realize like, you just can't do it all. And FOMO is like not a thing. You just have to decide what is the most exciting exciting for you? What do you really want to get out of your time in whatever country you're in? And like, let the rest go, because it's just, there's no way to do
Oh my
everything.
God. There's like so many things I want to comment on what you just said. And I'm like already like, I'm not going to be able to remember all the things that I wanted to comment on. But one thing speaking of like sayings that we love and have latched onto in my remote year orientation, Jason was talking about JOMO, which is the joy of missing out. And it is like my new favorite thing. And I talk about it all the time because he was talking about this idea of like with remote year, when you're traveling, there's always 12 million things that you can do. And on remote year in particular, people are always like, who wants to go to dinner? Who wants to go to this super cool library that's very Instagrammable? You know, like who wants to get fish tacos? And you're like, I'm sitting here in my bed watching Netflix with my leftover fish tacos, and I'm so happy about it right now. And like, this is exactly where I want to be, because you need that recharge time. And I think there's nothing like traveling with a large group that has taught me that balance of like, I guess, just how introverted that I really am. I think I was surprised to find that out. And so putting that time on my calendar and being like, no, like if I do that group dinner with 6 people, I'm going to be so tired that like, I'm not going to want to do the thing tomorrow that I'm more excited about. So I think your point of like, you got to pick what's more exciting to you and like, you know, build that schedule to make sure, you know, like remote work trusts you to work the way that you work best. And for me, that's like mid-morning to like mid-afternoon. And that's my focus time, but that also comes with like responsibility of like, you have to do that.
Totally. Kara, I'm curious, what's your like recharge when you're feeling like not grounded when you're traveling? What's the thing that you do that like brings you back and relaxes you and grounds you?
I go to an art museum by myself and do not talk to anybody.
Love it.
And then I do a lot of like laying in bed and watching Netflix, and like I usually will do my nails or like a face mask or something. My roommates were laughing at me because I brought like 7 face masks with me. Like I brought like 7 sheet masks, and they were like, "You have very limited baggage constraints." And they were like, "And you brought 7 sheet masks?" And I was like, "Yeah, I absolutely did."
You can buy those in foreign countries. That was a good thing to know.
Yes, you can.
Duty free.
Pro tip guys.
Pro tips from Emily: buy your sheet masks duty free. I love that. I think even I don't know if you knew that was like a grounding thing for you before remote year, and before working and traveling. But working and traveling kind of forced me to like think about like what are the things that actually keep me grounded, and like how do I pay attention to those and do them. And I think that was actually just a huge like personal growth lesson for me when I started living this lifestyle. Was really, I think just paying attention to those things. For me, I actually have like a really structured morning routine that I'm obsessed with, and it like sets my day up to be just so much better than if I don't do it. And it's pretty simple. Like I do some type of movement, yoga or run, I meditate, I journal, and like even just that has been just transformative in terms of being able to sort of keep the balance and sort of feel like I can sort of manage, you know, the fun and the productivity on both sides.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about some of the soft skills, like recognizing the balance, but like, what do you think are some of the essential skills that remote workers who travel need?
Yeah. So, okay. So I spent some time thinking about this one. I think there are actually quite a few, but the actually big theme is it's just being a great employee and just doing that sort of like tenfold. But I'll call out a few. So I think there's some basic remote employee skills that just like anyone who's working remotely, I think needs to have to be successful. One of them is like excellent time management. Like you need to be able to figure out what your schedule looks like, how you're going to manage it, how you're going to communicate with your schedules with other people, and also ensure that you're prioritizing the right stuff, because you now have a lot of other distractions in your world. Second one for this basic skills is just communication. You have to be an excellent communicator and really prioritize over communicating with the people that you're working with, particularly if you're not in a fully distributed environment. So like you Skillcrush remote year, everybody's remote. So there's already a culture of how you communicate in a remote environment. But some companies, right, there's some, you may be working and traveling, but everyone else is in the office. And so how do you be flexible to ensure that you're the one who's, you know, going above and beyond in the communication with the other people who are still back in the office?
Yeah, totally. I think something that I was telling, I'm in a really lucky position in that one of my coworkers and my best friend from college is actually doing remote year with me. And so he is doing the same travel with me, and something that we were talking about was the need to like both over communicate, but also like build in that extra time and like don't ask someone to meet you in the middle, like meet them at like 75%. And that means that like, yes, I'm going to take meetings at 10:30 at night because that's part of my schedule. And that means that I get to spend my days at art museums, you know?
Exactly.
And it's like, okay, like I might ask them to stay and to take a meeting at 4:30 when they would prefer not to, but I'm also going to stay up until 11 or, you know, and not inconveniencing your coworkers, because that's how you buy that goodwill to be that great employee who's like, yeah, sure, you can go travel the world for a year.
Totally, totally. And I think that's like the other thing there is like also like you need to then make sure that you're still driving towards whatever your goals are, and that you're like incredibly outcomes oriented, and like actually ensuring that people around you are also seeing what you're doing and how you're adding value, and that you are, you know, continuing to progress on whatever you're responsible for. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that kind of all plays back into like this communication and time management piece too, is like, how are you actually demonstrating like the work that you're doing? I'd be curious to see, like, since you've been on the road, like which skills have been like things that you didn't even like really realize. But I know for me, a skill that I actually didn't even realize was an important remote skill was like how to execute an effective remote meeting. Like that's a very different thing than when you're in an office. So that's like a big one that I think is interesting. And then, I mean, even just literally the skill of finding good internet and ensuring
that is like a skill. Like I'm like, what's above a skill? It's like a trade in and of itself, you know. Like I was walking around London, and I was like, I kept seeing signs for free Wi-Fi, and I would like stop and test the Wi-Fi, and then like move along, like and go about
Speedtest.net is bookmarked on my phone.
Like, I have the app, the internet speed test app, and it's like so great because then it's like, okay, cool. When I inevitably am stuck in this area and need to answer a work email or something, I'm like, yeah, where's the fast Wi-Fi? Like,
totally.
I love it.
Yeah,
I think you're tethering right now, which is a whole nother thing. Because you just like, even though, you know, I asked my Airbnb host to always give me an internet speed test, and I'm like, sorry, I'm gonna be that American. Can you please just like tell me how fast your internet is so I can plan accordingly, even if I have to tether? Like it's fine. Because you gotta have that backup plan.
Yeah. And I mean, now I feel spoiled because when traveling with remote year figures it all out for you. So it's like, try to find good internet. It's like, oh, actually the workspace is already sorted and my apartment has internet, and, you know, all of these things that when I'm on my own traveling, like I've got to spend a lot of time sorting out. So it's always very convenient when I'm back traveling with remote year and in our own community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was a big motivator for me as someone who has a lot of experience traveling by herself as a solo traveler and doing all of those things for myself that, you know, 2 or 3 months in, I'm like, okay, I'm at like decision fatigue. I'm sick of figuring all that stuff out. And I want to spend my mental energy on my actual job because like the travel logistics is a full-time job. Yeah. God forbid. I want to do a fun thing. I want to eat a fish taco and go to an art museum. That's going to be our future date when we finally run into each other.
Fish tacos and art museums. I'm very excited about this.
And then like, okay, it's got to be a city with good fish tacos now. So I think we've narrowed it down a little. Anyway, totally. Back on topic. So I think another topic that comes up a lot, especially on Instagram of all places for me, is the like, okay, but how are you actually affording to do this? Isn't this like costing so much money? And so I'm curious to hear how you manage your money while traveling and working remotely, and if you have a budget or if you just kind of have like a rough number or what your jam is.
Yep. So the way that I think about budgeting while I'm working and traveling is actually pretty similar to how I think about budgeting when I'm back home. I spend a certain amount on rent. I spend a certain amount of money on food. I spend a certain amount of money on like activities or things that I'm doing, whatever, vacations. It's pretty similar for me when I'm on the road. I think about how much am I going to spend on an Airbnb? How much am I going to spend on travel, on a workspace? And then I think about how much am I going to spend on a side trip or an activity? So it's really similar. I do have general ideas of how much I'm going to spend each month when I'm traveling. And I personally am not super, super crazy budgeter, but I have like big buckets that I know I want to fall in and that I keep an eye on. I'd also say the whole thing about budgeting for working and traveling is if you're not great at it at home, you're not going to be great at it on the road. So if it's a skill you want to build, you should figure it out wherever you are. And so, yeah.
That's a rule to live by if I ever heard one. If you're not good at it at home, you're not going to be good at it on the road.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I mean, I'd say like even on remote year, I think it's similar. You know, we talk about, so for those of you out there, there's a, depending on the length of the program, there's a down payment And then there's a monthly fee of $2,000. And with that, you get accommodation, workspace, travel between all countries, and most importantly, an incredible community of friends to travel with and experiences. But I'd say the thing to consider is that you're actually replacing what your expenses are at home. So you're spending $2,000 on working remotely and traveling. All of those things are replacing what you'd normally spend on rent and what you'd normally spend on your car, and what you'd normally spend on these other things. So especially, I'm sure, Carol, when you started doing remote year two, it's like when you're thinking about, what are the costs that I currently have that I can replace with remote year costs? There's, a lot of similarities. And so it's depending on what city you live in, it actually can be cheaper than what you normally pay on a lot of those things. And so
you're living in like a big city like New York or San Francisco or something. But I was living in Chicago, and it was like, okay, as soon as I moved out of my apartment, I got rid of my rent and my ComEd bill, and also like my gym membership and my transit pass and like things like that. And so and then also I was spending so much on travel anyway, just getting like to and from Chicago for places that that was also a big factor. But I budget the same way that I have at home, and I was telling you earlier that spreadsheets are my love language, which is something I have to credit my coworker Leah. I stole that from her. And I've like I've never felt closer to someone when she said that, because spreadsheets are like, yes, I love them. And so I do have a budget spreadsheet, and it's the same one I use at home, and I just slightly changed some of the categories, and I actually find that there are in quite a few cities, like I'm spending way less on food here in Prague than I did back home, just because the cost of food is different.
Right. Tacos in Mexico are literally the cheapest thing you'll ever eat, the most delicious thing you'll ever eat. So yeah.
Did you rename your food budget taco budget? Be honest.
Yeah, I think it's tacos and mezcal now, actually.
I was just gonna say tacos and beer. Fair enough. So we talked about budget. We talked about skills. What other things do you think that a remote worker has to have like in their tool belt? Let's see. I mean, you got to find a remote job. So I guess like where do you find remote jobs? Where do you recommend that people work?
Yeah, so I'd say there's a few different things. Well, I'll answer that question specifically. If you're looking for a remote job, which I would imagine many of you are because you're on this webinar, I think, Carol, like the big thing is finding a remote job is very similar to actually finding a regular job. I think there are lots of jobs, a lot of resources, just like there are lots of jobs and resources for finding non-remote jobs. But you really want to position yourself in the same way that you would position yourself if you were finding any job, which is the best way to get a job is to actually network and to put yourself out there and have informational interviews and connect with people and actually hone what you're looking for really specifically, and make sure that you're, not just because a job isn't posted on a website doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, right? There's lots of companies that are hiring for roles that actually aren't. And so, I think getting hyper clear on what type of a job you're looking for, not just like, oh, I want to work remotely, I'll do anything, but actually, nope, this is what I'm good at. This is where my skills are. This is where I think I could add value to a company. And then actually finding the companies that match up with that and building a relationship with people at those companies, reaching out to them on LinkedIn, taking them on coffee dates. I think in my experience, that's the most effective, is actually treating it, the way you would treat a regular job search, but you're actually just one of your criteria, just like salary, just like, location, is that you want it to be remote. The other thing I would also keep in mind is that there's a lot of jobs that could be remote but aren't. So looking at your own job and thinking, could I do my current job remotely? I think a lot of times you just don't actually see the light of like, actually, like, I could do my job remotely, and I just need to start to have those conversations. And sometimes the conversation will just start with, oh, like, I'm going to do 1 day a week, and I'm going to start there. And then I'm going to pilot a month, and I'm going to, have that be the next step. And then I'm going to actually potentially help my company build a flex work remote policy. And then I'm going to be fully remote. It doesn't have to be a one day I'm remote, 1 day I'm not remote, and the next day I am. There's definitely a process you can go through with your own company to transition. A lot of companies also have other roles that could be remote that you could transition into. And most companies, if you're there and you're a high performer, they would rather keep you because it's very expensive to hire new people. And so if you can position it in a way that's beneficial to the company, there's a lot of opportunity for you to actually get permission and to be able to, take your job fully remote. So those are two big things that I always keep in mind when talking to people about looking for remote jobs?
Yeah, I think this like idea of like kind of building yourself that bridge is something I talk to students a lot about. Of do that reflection and think about where you ultimately want to end up, and what, like you said, like your wish list of like, here are the things that I want. I want a remote job that is in this niche, and this is the skills that I want to use, and this is the work that I want to be doing. But also think about how to get there from where you are now. And I love your suggestion of like, yeah, like try to work from home one day a week, like negotiate that as part of your next job or with your current job, and then when you're working from home because you like have to get like the plumber has to come by or something, like prove that you are really on top of your stuff and make that like a super productive day to prove to your boss that like the next time you ask to work from home or have a work from home day that you have that track record to lean back on. And I think so. We have a list of job boards on our blog that's all full of remote job specific boards. And I think that's also a good place to look at companies that are all remote or things that these remote companies like specific skills that they're listing, so you can kind of make yourself that list of like, here are some skills that all of these remote companies want to hire for. Like I should learn this, or I'll get practice doing this in my current job, or things like that, so that you're building yourself that bridge with your current role and getting yourself one step closer there. Like it doesn't have to happen overnight, and it's probably not going to, but it's like totally doable if you approach it that way.
I think that there's just a couple of things you said that totally struck a chord too, which one is like the idea of actually using those job websites to research what types of remote roles are out there as well. I think there's also, there's a lot of jobs that you just don't even realize like could be remote that your skill set would match up with. So I think paying attention to that just in addition to like the actual skills that are in those listings. And then the other thing is this concept of like negotiating, right? Like it's something you can negotiate for, just like you negotiate for more time off, or you negotiate for your salary, in your next performance review as part of, however your company does negotiation processes like that, that can be something that you build into it. And I think that's something that people just don't even realize. Like when you're starting a new job, you can build that into the negotiation. When you're in the middle of a current role, you can build that into a negotiation. And that's, you can sort of approach it the same way you would approach, well, how would if you were asking for a promotion, how would you ask for a promotion? What work would you put in to prove your value and your worth? Similar thing, if you're going to ask for remote work, how do you sort of prove that you are actually, worthy of, continuing to be able to do your role successfully and, do it from wherever?
Yeah. Okay, so I see that we got about 20 minutes left, and so I do want to transition. I see we have a lot of questions coming in, so I want to make sure we have time to answer some of them live, and any that we don't get to, we'll definitely make sure we circle back and answer in the comments. But all right, first up, let's answer this one from Sarah. So what are the tricks to finding focus in places with lots of distractions? Coffee shops, home at the kitchen counter, new exciting cities, etc. I'll let you start with this one.
Okay, sounds good. So I personally have to really minimize the amount of distractions especially if I'm doing deep work. And so if I need to actually execute on a project or something, I'm probably sitting at my kitchen table where there isn't anyone else home, where I'll even lock myself, or I'll go somewhere, go outside. I'm actually sitting in a courtyard right now. I actually will find a quiet space where I can actually shut the door and make sure there aren't people around. So that's how I would say I minimize distractions there. Coffee shops for me are really hard to work in. And so for some people, they can totally put some noise canceling headphones on, which are amazing and do help, and knock out whatever they want at a coffee shop. But I usually will only work at a coffee shop if I'm checking emails, or maybe if I'm taking some calls. And so I don't have to actually be super, super focused on something, or deep work type focused. Yeah. And so, yeah, I'd say that's for me, it's less sort of minimizing distractions where they're there, but more finding places that just have less distractions generally.
Yeah, I see it. It's funny because I'm the opposite.
What about you, Caro?
Yeah, I can work from home, but it's not my favorite place. I get so much more work done when I'm out and about and surrounded by people. And my favorite place to work is typically in a coffee shop that has just enough background noise that I don't feel like an asshole for taking a call if I need to. But that I can put on headphones, and I like to have just a little background noise and get some stuff done. And that removes the distractions of I'm going to do laundry, or I'm going to put TV on in the background, because that never works. And so, I really like that. And I think something that has also helped me minimize distractions regardless of where I'm working, because there are those times where the flight is delayed, I'm going to be in the airport for 2 hours and I need to get some work done, is that I try to minimize my context switching. And so I really try to schedule all of my, like, I'm a manager. And so I try to schedule all my one-on-ones with people back to back so that I have like that brain on. And then when I'm doing that focus work or that like prioritizing, that, or having the 12 spreadsheets open, that's what I'm focused on, and recognizing, not only where you work best, but when you work best, and what tools you need to like make that happen.
I do the same thing. I do a lot of like blocking in my calendars too. So I make sure I've got all of sort of similar work back to back. So it helps you kind of stay focused. And yeah, I think the other interesting thing too, I think is like there are workspaces, remote year provides workspaces. If you're traveling on your own, there's co-working spaces around the world too. So there's just so many options for places for you to be able to actually get great work done. I think it's more just figuring out what works for you and where are you the most distracted? Where are you the less distracted? What hours of the day are you the most productive? When are you the least productive? And building your schedule around that.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of co-working spaces too. For that same reason, I usually find myself, I'm usually the one working in the kitchen because I want that background noise of like a cafe, but like reliable internet and not having to buy coffee and a muffin every other hour to not feel bad. But it's also really interesting. I found that a lot of cities, especially like bigger cities too, have co-working meetups. And so that's also, even if you don't join, that's a good place to see where other people are co-working, like places that are kind of open to people with their laptops getting work done. And it's a nice way to meet other people too. So hopefully that checked that box there, and hopefully that was some helpful info for you. All right, our next question we have is, I'm looking into remote work options so I can start traveling around the US. I'm currently finishing my degree in teaching. Yay, another teacher. But I'm wondering what kind of jobs lend themselves best to flexible work. So I will start this one off because obviously it's technical skills. So I'll say, as someone who is a developer, but does not work as a developer anymore, that as a remote worker, obviously there's a huge amount of remote jobs in, not only development and design, but also like digital marketing is becoming increasingly technical, and even like marketers and writers, and like having some kind of digital skills is really essential when you're working solely on your computer and relying on all these digital tools to connect to your coworkers around the world. But I would also say specifically that something I've really appreciated is having just a little bit of technical skills goes such a long way in even jobs that are seemingly unrelated. Like now I work in operations. My job does not require me to code, but there have been so many jobs in my career that I've gotten because it's like when you're looking, especially when you're trying to break into a new niche or a new kind of slightly different role, and you're building that bridge. It's like, okay, I'm looking at a sea of identical resumes. I'm going to hire the woman who can also update the website or also make graphics for our social media accounts. And that has definitely been a huge plus in my own personal background. What about you, Emily?
Well, specifically thinking about getting an education degree, like I think there actually are a lot of like online teaching opportunities now too. I think that's something to look at. And like, I think the reality is that it's about getting creative and actually thinking about, okay, well, what is in the education realm? There's also a lot of like great ed tech companies to work for. There's a lot of curriculum building for districts that could happen. There's just a lot of different opportunities there. So I think it's really about thinking about how do you get creative about the skills that you have, and potentially also build some skills not remote. And then once you have a couple years of experience somewhere, then actually, I think jumping in to discovering the remote work, not that there aren't entry-level remote work options, but I think sometimes you're more likely to be able to have some more leverage when you have a little bit more experience and when you have something you can kind of point to. But there's definitely opportunities in both buckets.
Yeah, I wish actually the friend that I mentioned that also works at Skillcrush, Blair is our curriculum writer here at Skillcrush, who is a former teacher. He also did Teach for America, just like Emily, and was a classroom teacher for, I believe, 5 years, and made the switch to Skillcrush and to online curriculum writing because he was really interested in remote work and wanted to be able to work remotely. And so I wish he was here to talk about his experience, but as his best friend, I can tell you that I feel like I lived it with him, and it's definitely possible, like Emily said, to kind of build that bridge with a lot of online teaching opportunities or curriculum design or skill
learning
sets
and development opportunities. Yeah.
Oh yeah, even in kind of that HR space, that's a good suggestion too. All right, so what are some tips for convincing my employer to allow me to go remote?
Yes, my favorite. So just to kind of shameless plug here, Remote Year actually walks you through this entire process. If you do decide to join our Remote Year program, we have an entire team that is dedicated to literally getting you from the first conversation to the last conversation and helping you go through the whole process. For anyone who's just trying to sort of take those first few steps of asking your boss to let you work remotely, I'd actually say approach it with a ton of intentional planning. I think sometimes people have conversations with their bosses prematurely before, they've really done like the research and really kind of put some time into thinking about, well, why would your boss give you permission? Why would your boss's boss give you permission? Why would your CEO care about letting you work remotely? And so I think step one is really evaluating like, what is your company, right? Are you working for a small startup that has lots of flexibility? Or are you working for a Fortune 500 company that has a ton of like red tape and bureaucracy, right? Possible in both scenarios, but are going to require a different step, and so do you only have one person you need permission from? Is it just going to be your manager, or is it going to be your manager and your HR team and your mobility team? How are you going to get all of them on board? What are going to be the reasons that they would say yes? Why? What is the potential benefit to them? And just to kind of give some suggestions there. There's a lot of companies that are really trying to move into this space, and they're trying to allow more flexible work options to their employees, but it's hard. They don't exactly know how they're going to do it. You could be the pilot program. You could say, I'm going to figure out how to help us build the policy. I'm going to be the pioneer. I'm going to work with my manager to build a structure that could work for other people at our company, and I'm going to help us through this, which one, shows your leadership, and two, helps them sort of take a step forward without necessarily setting a precedent. There's lots of reasons why companies are trying to build in more remote work options, mainly retention and, recruitment are two of the big ones that we see for why companies actually care about it. So how can you frame your ask in actually this could be a potentially great opportunity for the company to better retain employees or recruit more attractive talent. So I'd say all of those are the high level things to think about, but the actual like on paper thing is put some proposal together with all of those pieces in place. Have a conversation with your manager where you fully thought all of these things out, and don't give up. I always like to say no is just a request for more information.
We've got a lot of good nuggets in this call.
Very quotable.
Yeah, totally. No, those are great suggestions. And I think I've seen firsthand how, too, being a high performer and being a prepared and informed, and having that great proposal. There's so many people in my program who, whose bosses have made so many exceptions and let them be the pioneer. We have one person who works in a very traditional Fortune 500 company who HR has a firm no remote policy. And they made an exception for her because she's really great. And they just didn't tell HR. And now they're just kind of flying her in under the radar. And, it's like people will make it work if you give them a reason to make it work.
Totally. There's also a ton of resources, like step-by-step resources on our website too, for exactly how to think about all of those conversations and all of the pieces of the puzzle. So definitely encourage anyone who's thinking about just even not necessarily for how to get permission for remote year, but even just permission for remote work. So yeah, feel free to check that out. And I think you guys have a guide as well.
Yeah, great. Okay, so from Roxanne, we have a question regarding time zone differences. How do you work around them? And this is a great question because Emily and I were actually just talking about how a lot of travelers have their favorite time zones, and my personal favorite is European time zones. So right now, we mentioned that I'm working from Prague, so it is 8:50 at night here, and I'm obviously working. I'm on a webinar right now talking to you lovely folks, and this is my preference. I love being able to sleep until 9 in the morning and make myself a leisurely breakfast and sit down and kind of plan my day. And, we talked about Emily's morning routine, and I really appreciate having that time. And then to go do something fun. This morning I went on a hike to a national monument with two coworkers who came to visit me, and got to go do a fun, that fun thing. And then I settled into my work day, and I got some really good focus time before all my coworkers worked up to get some stuff done before kind of, all the pinging started and all the meetings started. And so I think everyone kind of has their own answer to this, but my strategy has definitely been to, be smart about what time zones I'm picking, and what I'm willing to sacrifice and what I'm not, in terms of do I want to take a meeting at 1 a.m.? And also knowing, if you're a freelancer or a remote worker, or how flexible your company is, and how much of your job has to be synchronous and like in a meeting is also going to be a really big factor there. Like I have people in my remote year group who are working with people on the West Coast and really have to be up late. And that's different than me, in which I can kind of stack my synchronous work towards the end of my workday. So where are you right now, Emily? I see your tropical background. Mexico, right?
I'm in La Paz, Mexico. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think all of that.
Oh, sorry,
I think that's, no, we have a little bit of a delay. Totally agree. I have a similar preference. European time zone is also my favorite because you get a lot more morning and mid-afternoon hours to either get some really great work in or actually go on an adventure. And I just find that that's my best working time. However, I'd say like there's a lot of factors that go into play here. Like your job may require you to work on one schedule, and that's okay. So that may mean, that you'd prefer to, be in the Americas so you can stay in that same time zone. You may be more flexible and Europe may work. For Asia, we also have a lot of people who actually flip their schedule, and there's a lot of evening workers on remote year who will all work together at night, and then they'll go do an adventure and they have all day to do whatever they want. So that totally happens too, and we're set up to support people there. One of my writer friends actually prefers the Asia time zone because she actually gets an entire day extra on her deadlines. So it's just worth approaching it with a really flexible, open mindset and figuring out, what adjustments can you make and what adjustments do you have to make, and how do you pick sort of the right places. But it's all manageable, and I'd say it just takes some intentionality there.
Yeah, something I really have appreciated about remote year is that when I've traveled alone, I feel way more like I'm missing out on things because there are, people doing stuff at like 6, going to dinner at 6 o'clock like a normal person. But here there's like, we're all working these time zones, and there definitely is that late night crew who's going to walk back to your apartment with you from the co-working space at 11 o'clock, or, totally. There's the late night dinner crew who goes to dinner at 10 o'clock every night. And it's just like, yeah, like you said, approaching it with that open mind of like, dinner doesn't have to be at 6. It can be at 10 if you stay up till 2 and sleep until 11. Like you can adjust your day however you want, and that's the beauty of remote work.
Totally. And I think the thing to remember too is like, it doesn't have to be permanent, right? Like your body will adjust to wherever you are. So, I think if you can just sort of approach it of like, I'm going to just try this and like, see how this is going to go. And like, you may love it or you may hate it. And like, that's okay. It's all, I think part of this experience of working remotely and traveling is that it just opens you up to trying different things and being challenged and getting forced into like, forced outside of your comfort zone or into new time zones.
Yes. We'll see how I manage with 4 months in Asian time zones early next year. I'll report back. All right. So I think we have time for another question or two. We'll see how long-winded Emily and I get. Is that from Preston here? I've been coding for about 6 months now and don't have any professional experience. I'm working to become a front-end developer. Is remote work a viable option as a first job in development? So I guess I can start this one. I would say that there are definitely junior front-end development jobs out there that are remote. And there's also, I would encourage you to look for jobs that aren't necessarily called junior front-end developer. There are a lot of jobs out there, particularly as a developer on, marketing teams or sales teams, on these cross-functional teams that need someone with development skills, and they may be called something different. So I would encourage you to really dig into the job requirements and kind of the responsibilities of those. But also, that being said, I think, they are fewer. And so something I would encourage you to think back about some of the stuff we talked about earlier in the webinar about building that bridge and giving yourself some options and some ways to build towards that. So that you're keeping your options open, that you have some flexibility there. I would also encourage you to think about starting freelancing sooner rather than later, so that not only are you getting experience working remotely and with clients that aren't sitting right next to you, but so that you're building up that professional experience right away and working those muscles. And I think the longer you put it off, the harder, at least for me, the scarier it was to do it. And so I think both of those things are really going to help you when it comes time to find that remote job, because you're going to be able to say, look, I have a portfolio of projects you can look at, and I have this experience already working with people who are not co-located. And that's going to help you get an extra foot in the door. All right. So let's see. I'm going to squeeze in one more question here, which is from Abby. What is the deal with visas? Are there often no-go locations because of issues around visa acquisition? What's your advice for working around this area of working remotely? I'll let you take this one, Emily.
Okay. Yes, this is an interesting one. So, the thing about visas is that we actually encourage, and I would encourage you to actually do your own research. Every person's different, every role is different, every company is different, every country is different. So I would say that there are just a lot of different paths out there. There are some companies that actually do require their employees to have working visas in all countries that they're working in, especially bigger Fortune 500 companies, and sometimes they're willing to pay for them. Other companies don't, and every country's rules are also changing. So I'd say one of the really interesting things that we're at Remote are actually involved in is working with countries on getting clarity on their visa, So one really cool example is that we're working with Estonia on actually creating a location independent visa. And so we're actually hoping that when that goes through, that will be an example for lots of other countries. You can imagine that it's a little bit complicated since most people now will probably check their email on their phone at some point when they're on vacation, right? And so does that mean that you are working in that country now and you need a working visa? That's sort of like the line that is complicated. Remote year cities in particular, especially if you're from the US, we're able to give just a little bit of context and guidance based on the research we've been able to do. But if you're not from the US, we definitely recommend doing your own research there. And even if you are from the US, continuing to do your own research based on what your role in your company is. So the high level is there is research that needs to be done when you're traveling to a foreign country and choosing to work remotely there. And we can't actually give too much advice other than to make sure you do your research. But I would say it's also, depending on where you're from, it can be a barrier. But I'd say particularly if you're from the US, we have a lot of options for places that we are able to go.
Yeah, and there's a lot of support and resources out there to make it as painless as possible, as something like that can be, at least. Okay, so we are quickly coming up at the end of this hour because I went a little over. So I want to thank all of you for being here with us. And as a reminder, we will be sending you all a link to this webinar replay. And to those of you who did not get your questions answered, never fear. We'll be in the comments making sure every single question is answered. So before we sign off, I just want to say again that I hope our discussion was helpful and gave everyone a better idea of how to get started building a remote career. I truly believe that remote work options make work more inclusive and better for everyone. And I know for a fact that these career opportunities are out there. So if you've been dreaming of traveling the world, seeing new places, or just a more flexible life so you can go and see your best friend's new baby right away, then please check out the resources we mentioned and start planning your pivot. You'll be jet setting before you know it. And if you have any questions about our programs and how they can help you go remote, please feel free to book 20 minutes of virtual face-to-face time with our program ambassador, Carrie, to discuss your career and which of our blueprints would work best for you. These sessions are totally free, and they'll open again next on October 18th. So just email hello@skillcrush.com to book yours. And because you are part of the Skillcrush community, Remote Year has generously offered $200 off of your first month with one of their programs. So we'll follow up with the link in that email so that you can learn more about their awesome programs and run into Emily and I in one of our Fish Taco dates. And now for that surprise I was talking about. As a special gift, we are sending everyone a free copy of the Ultimate Guide to Landing a Remote Job You Love. This is one of our exclusive guides with 40 pages of helpful tips and resources that will get you started on the path to your very own remote career from anywhere in the world. So read away. I want to thank you, Emily, for taking the time to be with us today. I love talking with you. This was so much fun. Yeah, thanks again, everybody, for coming, and we will see you all next time.
Awesome. Thanks, Carol. Bye, everyone.
Bye.